Hello, welcome to the August 6th Horticulture School Summer Webinar Series. My name is Anthony Matenko. I'm the fruit crop specialist for Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development. So today we are going to have myself and John Gavlosky talk on some timely topics. John's going to go over some of the potential late season insect pests you could see in horticulture crops, especially given our hot, dry weather, the ones that are kind of favored by this type of weather. And I'm going to just do a kind of a brief summary to date of the fruit crop harvest. A lot of it's completed. Still have some things to come, but kind of go over that and some of the challenges that have been, excuse me, growers have seen. So, Laura, I guess we go to our poll questions just to start things off.
Okay, great. So everyone will notice the first two are fairly familiar from each time. So how do you see yourself with the horticultural industry? Producer of horticultural crops, work in agri-supply, agribusiness, or government or university personnel, or other. Whoops, I think I have some spelling challenges in there. And so I see people are voting. This just helps everyone kind of have an idea of who they're talking to each webinar. So just submit your answer and we can launch the results. Okay. So the results, 50% producer of horticultural crops, 0% work in agri-supply, agribusiness, 38% government or university personnel, and 13% other.
Great. So I guess, oh yeah, we have a second one as well.
Next one, yeah, that's just one more. If you are a horticultural producer, what size is your farm? 0 to 4.9 acres, 5 to 14.9 acres, 15 to 49.9 acres, or 50 plus acres. So just wait for a couple more seconds on this. And again, we're just kind of collecting this to know kind of who we're speaking to today.
Yeah, this helps us just kind of tailor what we're speaking about to the audience and make this as interesting to you and useful to everyone.
Exactly. Okay, so I'm going to share those results. 20% is 0 to 4.9 acres, 60% at 5 to 14.9 acres, 0 at 15 to 49.9, and 20% at 50 plus acres. All right, so back at you. You've got the screen again.
Great, thank you. So I think we'll move on to John Gavlosky, our provincial entomologist. So Lori, if we can switch to John's screen. And John, if you're ready to go.
Okay, so you guys should be able to see my screen now.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so I've got really 4 objectives with my presentation today. Number 1, I want to introduce you to some of the insects that we're currently seeing at least very noticeable levels of in the province. Number 2, I'm going to introduce you in some cases to some of the things that eat some of those insects, because we're also seeing a lot of certain predators as well. Number 3 on my list, how does dry weather affect these insects? And number 4, at Hort School, I always get asked a lot about, I guess, more ecological or biological ways of controlling some of these insects. So at the very end, we're going to go over some of those options as well. So those are our 4 objectives. Oops, one sec here. There we go. Had to figure out how to advance things. Okay, so we're going to start with grasshoppers. And in the Hort School session, I think it was back in June, we covered grasshoppers and we noted that there was a lot of different types. There's about 85 species in Manitoba. Not all are pest species. We've got 4 species that can build their populations and will get into our crops and do crop damage. We've got these 4 pest species. There's actually 3 of the 4 that we're seeing relatively high levels of this year, but each area seems to have its own blend, I guess, of the grasshoppers. In the Carmen area and in a lot of the central region, two-striped grasshopper is our dominant species. That's the one on the left of your screen. You can easily tell them because they've got these 2 white stripes that start right in behind the eye and go right back to the tip of the wings. So that's two-striped, dominant in much of the central region. When you get up into the northwest, into that Swan River area, there's another species showing up there. It's called Packard grasshopper. It's got a couple white stripes too, but they're more start again right behind the eye almost, but just go to the end of the thorax, big broad white lines. And if you look carefully at the back of the hind leg, the part we call the tibia, it's bright blue in Packard grasshopper. Now, both of these are generalists. They will feed on a lot of things. They will feed on both broadleaf and grassy plants, so they're quite generalists in their behavior. Another one that we are seeing in some areas, though, is Clearwinged grasshopper. This one is a little bit different. It's primarily a grass feeder. So where this is dominant, they'll feed in cereal crops, they'll feed in forage grasses, they'll feed in pasture grasses. If you're growing vegetables, fruit crops, they're not likely going to damage them. So this is why it sometimes does matter what species you have. You can determine what it's likely to move into or not. And to determine Clearwinged grasshopper, it also seems to have a couple stripes that start at the top of the thorax, in this case, run to the back of the wings. It's actually quite a bit smaller than the two-striped grasshopper. But if you look at the wings, when it's landed and its wings are folded, you'll notice these very bold, dark dots on the wings. So if I was naming this grasshopper, I would not have called it Clearwinged grasshopper because it probably confuses people. The flight wings, which you can see sticking out at the back here, those are the ones that are clear. The forewings, the ones that cover those flight wings, have these dark spots on them. So just remember, Clearwinged grasshopper, forewings aren't clear. Anyway, that's Clearwinged grasshopper, grass feeder, won't move into most vegetable and fruit crops. Again, they prefer grasses. And this one, I've been getting reports of this from the South Interlake and the South Central region. We saw some really high levels of this species when we got down into that Manitou Pilot Mound area. So there are pockets of this species where it seems to be dominant in areas. And I'll just scoot back actually for a second, talk about dry weather and grasshoppers. Grasshoppers do better in hot, dry weather for a few reasons. One, the 4 potential pest species. When you get a dry and hot summer, the heat makes them start laying their eggs a bit earlier. And the 4 pest species can all lay a lot of eggs. So when they start laying them earlier in the year, earlier meaning probably late July this year, sometimes that egg laying continues well into September. And if we don't get some cool weather and frosts in September, sometimes almost right to the end of September, they'll keep on laying eggs. So they can lay a lot of eggs. The other thing that happens, sometimes you get fungal pathogens that will take out a portion of the grasshopper population. Those fungal pathogens require moisture. We haven't had that, and we're not seeing much in the way of fungal pathogens in our grasshoppers this year. And reason number 3, when you get a dry year, all of the grasshoppers that I showed you, in addition to crops, they also feed on a lot of natural vegetation. So stuff that is in the ditches, except for Clearwinged grasshopper, the other species will feed on a lot of the clovers. They really like lamb's quarter, pigweed, the grasses in the ditches, even Clearwing will feed on those. So all the natural vegetation out there helps keep the grasshoppers from invading your crops in bigger numbers. In a dry year, you have less of that natural vegetation, and especially you get into later summer, people are cutting ditches and things. It means they've got less natural vegetation. They move into crops. So that's partially what's happening. Now, we are seeing a lot of some of the grasshopper's key predators, and I'm going to highlight a couple of them. Earlier, I think in June, I talked a bit about blister beetles. There's a black species and a gray species that specialize as larvae in feeding on grasshopper eggs. So we saw a lot of black and gray blister beetles early on in June and early July. Right now, we're seeing a lot of a fly that almost looks like a little bumblebee mimic. But when you look at the mouth parts, they're huge. And this is a type of bee fly. And in fact, the bee fly in my photo here is called the grasshopper bee fly. It's a particular species of bee fly. We've got lots of species of bee flies. But the grasshopper bee fly, it will actually follow grasshoppers and figure out where they're laying their eggs. It lays its eggs nearby. And the larvae of grasshopper bee fly specialize in feeding on grasshopper eggs. That's all they feed on. So they can, when they're abundant, they can help out. They won't eliminate, but they can help reduce the population. And we were noticing quite a few of these when we were sweeping some of the canola fields around Carmen. Sometimes every time we did a set of sweeps, we'd have a grasshopper bee fly in our net. They like, as adults, they like to come to flowers for nectar and pollen. So just by sweeping some flowering plants, we got a good indication that levels were more than what we're used to seeing anyway, which is a good thing in this case. Field crickets, whether you like them or not, they have a good side to them. They will feed on grasshopper eggs. Field crickets are actually omnivores. They feed on both plant material, often plant material on the ground. Sometimes they'll climb plants. But they will feed on things like insect pupa and insect eggs, and they have been known to dig for and feed on grasshopper eggs. So field crickets do have a good side to them. And ground beetles. There's lots of different species of ground beetles. There's about 980 species in Canada, and there's some that will actually get into the cracks in the soil and feed on things like grasshopper eggs as well. So our grasshopper predator profile is actually looking pretty good this year. That's because they've got lots of prey to feed on, so they will help. But I think we still need some moisture, some timely rains to help with the grasshopper situation. Flea beetles, another one to watch out for. Now, we do have lots of types of flea beetles in Manitoba as well. There's 72 species, and there's roughly 10 species that will feed on cruciferous plants like cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, kale. 2 of those are super abundant, 2 of those 10. And the one on the bottom, and the picture on the left, the one on the bottom is your crucifer flea beetle. That's the one we're seeing a lot of right now. And there's another species called the striped flea beetle. Very similar, small, dark, but it has a couple yellow stripes. These are your 2 pest species for cruciferous crops. Just as a heads up, some of the canola fields in some areas, we're seeing quite high numbers on the canola pods right now, which has got some of the canola growers worked up. The reason this is of significance to people growing vegetables is when this canola matures a little bit further or is swathed, these flea beetles are probably not done feeding, and they're going to be looking for anything cruciferous to feed on before they go into their overwintering. They overwinter as adult beetles, but they will feed sometimes right into September before they wrap it up and start looking for overwintering. So heads up, if you're growing cruciferous crops, just keep an eye on things, because that flea beetle movement is starting, and especially once we start seeing the canola advance just a little bit more and start getting swathed, there will be this massive flea beetle movement. So if you've just got some small rows of cruciferous plants, the row covers might be an option for some people. Otherwise, you may have to look at other control methods, insecticides possibly. Another crucifer feeding pest to keep an eye on is Diamondback moth. And once again, based on what happened in the canola fields, there was a lot in some areas. The highest populations this year seem to be in the eastern part of the province. The area north of Winnipeg, getting into the southern interlake, also had some quite high levels. I didn't hear of too many high populations going further west. And when I was in the northwest in the Russell-Roblin area last week doing some sweeping, I could find them, but I had to sweep hard to find them. So that area didn't seem to be as high in levels. But certainly eastern Manitoba, South Interlake, if you're growing cruciferous crops, just keep an eye. We seem to be in the part of their cycle where they're transitioning from their late juvenile stage into their pupa stage. So a lot of pupa in some of the fields right now. And so there will be probably one more generation. The pupa, it'll take another 1 to 2 weeks. They'll be hatched out as adults, and then they'll be laying eggs. So we could get another generation of larvae yet, probably later in August or into September. So again, if you're growing cruciferous vegetables, especially in the east and south interlake, you want to really keep an eye for Diamondback going forward. And one other one just to watch for is the cabbage butterfly. And this is an insect that actually has 2 common names depending on the stage. The adults we call cabbage butterflies. Those are the white butterflies you see flying around, and they'll have some black dots on the wings. Their larval stage is called imported cabbageworm. It's a green caterpillar, but it's kind of got a hairy, velvety appearance. And if you look very carefully on the back, they've got this yellow stripe that goes down the back of their body. So imported cabbageworm, yellow stripe, and I'm going to go back a slide here. Diamondback moth will be much smaller and no yellow stripe down the back. And again, quite a bit smaller. So it's easy enough to tell those 2 apart. This is more of a concern. People growing cabbage, again, cauliflower, broccoli, cruciferous crops, they're a cruciferous specialist. So you've got a complex of green caterpillars that can get into cruciferous vegetable crops. And these are the 2 that we're seeing around right now. So those are ones you need to keep an eye on. Spotted wing Drosophila, I know Anthony's been trapping for these, so I won't say too much about these because Anthony might have an update for you. He's been trapping for these, and he started to get them in his traps early in July, and I know people have been keeping an eye out for those. If anybody does need to have a control program for them, there is a list of registered insecticides on our Manitoba Ag and Resource Development website. I know Anthony keeps that updated, so you can refer to that if you do need to be controlling for spotted wing Drosophila. And just to review why we call them spotted wing Drosophila, they're a fruit fly, but they're different than some of the other fruit flies. Female doesn't have spots on the wings, male does. That's why they call them spotted wing. But the female has an egg layer that is at the very edge. It's almost saw-like. It's serrated like a saw. So they can actually get their eggs into fruit that isn't overripe. Most other fruit flies require the fruit to be starting to go soft before they can lay eggs into it, whereas spotted wing Drosophila, the fruit can still be a bit harder and they can still get eggs into it, which is why they're more of a concern than the other fruit flies that we have around. And if anybody is trapping for spotted wing Drosophila, do note that you can get other fruit flies in those traps. So if you're looking for them, they've either got spots on their wings or a saw-like egg layer for spotted wing Drosophila. And in a dry year like this, an insect that we often not an insect, sorry, an arachnid that we often start to see is spider mites. So spider mites, they're, again, small little mites. The first thing you would probably notice is the white speckling on your plants. So when they feed, they put their mouth parts into the cells and take out the juice, and you get these little white spots on the plant. And if there's enough of this white speckling, the leaves will start to turn a yellow and then a brown color, start to shrivel up on you. And if you're not sure if you've got spider mites, The easiest way is just to shake the plants over something. I take a camping wash pan into the field with me, and I just shake the plants over that, and I can see the little specks moving around. Another thing that works quite well, just grab a clipboard and if you have a black piece of construction paper or a black piece of paper, put that on and just shake the leaves over your clipboard, and on that, white will work as well. You'll see the little specks moving around. Black is even better. Shake your leaves over top of your tray or your clipboard, and you'll see the little specks moving all around. Now, spider mites do a lot better in dry weather. In more moist conditions, there's pathogenic fungi that help keep their population down. Sometimes heavy pounding rains can help out too, but it's really the humidity, the pathogenic funguses that get going can really knock the population back. If you're needing to control spider mites, you've got a few options. If it's a greenhouse operation, there are biocontrols available. Anthony came by my office this morning with his box of predatory mites. Now, the one he was using, it used to be called Amblicius cucumeris. They've changed the name to Californicus. The name that you often see right now is Neosulus californicus. It's a predatory mite. It might be called Amblicius californicus in some biological supply companies, depending on whether they've transitioned to the new name or not. So either Amblicius or Neosulus. And there's a second one that some control companies sell. It's called Phytosulus persimilis. So even spray in Winnipeg, I know they used to carry them. They can bring them in. So you've got a couple options with predatory mites. If you're using insecticides, just be careful what you use. Not all insecticides kill spider mites well. In fact, some of the common cheaper insecticides, like your pyrethroids, will actually flare their populations because they don't kill the spider mites well, but they kill the natural enemies well. So be careful what you use if you're using insecticides. In Minnesota, they had verified spider mite resistance to chlorpyrifos. That's your Lorsban, Pyrenex, those products. So don't use chlorpyrifos if you've got spider mites. Don't use pyrethroids. What you can use, if you want to go cheaper, for some field crops, people will use Saigon or Lagon, which is dimethoate, but it is kind of a nastier product. One that is relatively safer and great on mites is called abamectin. Brand names that you'd be familiar with would include either Agrimec or Avid. Avid, I think, is more the Hort formulation. Agrimec, potatoes and crops like that. Abamectin kills both the eggs and the mites, so it's quite effective. It will cost more than some of the other products I've mentioned, but it's a miticide essentially, so it doesn't kill most of the natural enemies that are there. So if you've got some biocontrol working in your field, it might be something you'd want to consider. Lygus bugs, I'll just mention this one briefly. They're insects with multiple host plants. So on the left of your screen is the adult, on the right is the juvenile. They've got sucking mouth parts, so they have a beak, and they like to pierce flowers, buds, pods, feed on seeds. So they can be a problem in some crops. I know strawberries earlier in the season they can be. You'll see them up on your berry crops quite a bit too. They feed on lots of different things. Easiest way to look for them is to shake the plants over something or use a sweep net, but they are very quick, so they will often run away as soon as you're getting near the plants. I would say populations are moderate this year. I have seen higher levels. Some of the people in the eastern region were telling me they were seeing quite noticeable levels in some of their canola crops. So again, once the canola is harvested, they're going to be moving around. They do like a lot of different things. So if you've got a crop that's producing young pods or seeds, they will feed on beans, peas, things like that until they're hard. Once they harden up, you no longer have to worry about them. So just something else to keep an eye on. On the positive side, something else we're seeing a lot of this year is lacewings. And in fact, this isn't a vegetable crop, but we were in a quinoa field north of Carmen here 2 weeks ago, and we were just amazed by the level of green lacewing adults we were getting sweeping the quinoa. And I know lacewings will get into the vegetable crops as well. They like to feed on aphids in particular, but they will feed on caterpillars, so small caterpillars like diamondback moth. So if you've got cruciferous vegetables and you've got some diamondback moth in there, don't be surprised if you see either these green lacewings, they're brown alligator-shaped larvae. This one here is eating a Lygus bug, or their eggs, which are often on little stalks. So we've been seeing a lot of these this year, so they're helping out. And we've been trying to promote some of our more common natural enemies with a series of videos through a program called Field Heroes. So Field Heroes, they have a website, and again, it's entomologists across Western Canada. A group of us got together and have pulled this program together. And there's fact sheets on some of these natural enemies. We've got a Pest and Predators field guide that's just come out, and we've got a series of videos. And so I'm just going to play the video on lacewing larvae. You're going to see lacewing larvae devouring aphids in this sequence here.
The stumpy lacewing larva approaches its prey. They aren't called aphid lion for nothing. Attack! The lacewing skewers the aphid with her sickle-shaped mandibles and shakes her prey above her head. The lacewing injects the aphid with digestive enzyme and consumes her liquefied dinner. That little one on the left shouldn't stick around. They could be next on the menu.
Okay, so those are your lacewings. You might have noticed the aphid that was in the mandibles of the lacewing. It was producing a little droplet out of those tubes that were coming out of the back of its abdomen. Those tubes are called cornicles, and the little droplet is something we call an alarm pheromone. So it was basically telling all the other, by the smell of it, it was telling all the other aphids, I'm being attacked, run, as much as an aphid can run. They don't move too quick, but basically that was alarming the other aphids that it was being attacked. Another thing that we're seeing a lot of this year is hoverflies, and you will notice these as little bee and wasp mimics. There's lots of different types of hoverflies, 539 species in Canada. These will come to pretty much anything flowering as adults for the nectar. So again, most are bee and wasp mimics. Two wings, they have relatively short antennae. Bees and wasps, the antennae are a bit longer, and bees and wasps will have a constriction between their thorax and abdomen. Flies don't. So if you look carefully, you can tell them apart. Don't let their black and yellow colors scare you. They can't sting you. But their good side is their larvae, which look like slugs, will get onto the plants and feed on things like aphids. So here's two different species. One of them is brown, one is green. Again, lots of different species, slug-shaped, tapered heads. They've got a kind of needle-like mouth part. They'll impale an aphid, hold it up, suck the juice out of it, and then put it back down and devour another aphid. So they're good aphid-eating machines, and there's been a fair amount around. So just to wrap up, I'm going to go over just a few biological insecticides in case you do have any of these issues. For caterpillars, one thing that is quite selective and organic is dipel. You might see it as dipel, or you might see it as BTK or foray. There's different names for it. Same thing. It's a bacteria called Bacillus thuringiensis. There's different strains of this bacteria. Kerstaki is the strain that kills caterpillars. There's other strains that kill beetles and other things, but not caterpillars. So you have to make sure you've got the right product. But if you use any of these target only caterpillars. They will not kill any of your natural enemies. So lady beetles, lacewings, hoverflies, parasitic wasp bees, you'd have to drown them in it. You can't kill them with this bacteria. It's responding to the acidity of the caterpillar's stomach, and unless it has that exact acidity, it won't kill them. So quite selective. You apply it as a spray normally. There's also another, this is a sidetrack, but there's another strain of this called Israeliensis that targets just fly larva, and it's used for mosquito control. That's a bit of a sidetrack. But this strain, caterpillars only, best to try to target the caterpillars when they're young. The caterpillars do have to feed and ingest it to be killed by it, so it will not kill adults or pupa of Lepidoptera, just larvae. Now, if aphids are your issue, or spider mites, so a greenhouse situation, you could use biocontrol. Outdoors, insecticidal soaps are another organic option that might be available. Basically, it's soap and water. You can make up your own versions if you want to. There's all kinds of recipes for that out there, or you can purchase pre-made solutions. So aphids, spider mites, but you do want to make good contact. You're not relying so much on ingestion. You want to hit the insects with this if you can. So just make sure if the spider mites are under the leaves, try to make good contact with the mites. And you can get good success with this. And the other good thing too with this product, insecticidal soaps, there really isn't much of a pre-harvest interval. So you can, edible crops, you can use it usually right up to and including the day of harvest. So that might be appealing for some. Greenhouse situation for things like aphids, thrips, whiteflies, if you've got them. There is a product called Botanigard, also an organic product. It's based on a fungus called Bovaria bassiana. One of the ways it can be applied, and I know they've done research on this in Ontario, is through bumblebees. People that are using bumblebees to pollinate tomatoes and things in their greenhouse, you can put a little tray of this next to the hive that they have to walk through as they're coming and going, and they will spread it to the plants. So it can be applied that way if people are set up to do it. And again, this is more...
John, we seem to have lost your audio. Anthony, do you want to run down there and let John know? He probably doesn't know we've lost his audio.
Yep, I'll do.
Thank you. Just bear with us, everyone. It'll just take one moment. Sometimes when we lose our audio, we're not really aware of it, and we just carry on.
Yeah, Lori, John's computer has muted him now. I guess, I don't know if he was going to say something unbecoming from a civil servant. I'm sure not. So we're going to go to Anthony, I think. But John has his information up there, contact information, and send him questions.
Okay,
Yes.
I'll send it over to you, Anthony.
Hey, thank you. Again, thanks, John, for that great presentation and kind of bringing us up to speed. Here, I'm going to go to my screen. Okay, and so just a reminder for everyone who's on the call, if you have questions related to horticulture production, please type them into the questions feature on your screen and we'll do our best to provide you answers. And Marla's kindly agreed to monitor our questions and chat if any come in. So before I get started on my presentation on fruit harvest, Lori, can we launch our last poll question, please?
Betcha. Okay, so our last poll question. If you are a horticultural producer, overall, how have your yields been for the horticultural crops you have harvested already? So you can choose 1, no harvest yet, above average yields, below average yields, or complete crop loss, no harvest expected. So if you can choose one of those, whatever best fits, and submit that, I can launch those results right away. Give it just a couple more seconds here. and I will launch that. All right, so we have to 20% no harvest yet, 0% above average yields, 40% average yields, 40% below average yields, and 0 complete crop loss. Right.
Well, that's good to know. That kind of corresponds with what kind of I'm going to talk about with the fruit crops. So kind of focus on the kind of the major fruit crops in the province. A lot of the harvesting is done on, especially the berry crops are done or wrapping up. First one I'll talk about today is strawberries. It was a bit of a disappointing year for strawberries. We had more winter injury, winter mortality in plants than usual, which definitely reduced plant density in the field. And I mean, we had such an unusual spring in that we had went from 1 week to having hard frost, especially for some areas around in the capital region and South Interlake and Eastern Manitoba, to the next week going to extreme heat temperatures. So very stressful on the plants, especially when you're producing a delicate berry like a strawberry. It was definitely challenging on the plant, and we did see some, decent yields for kind of that first picking, some okay size. All strawberry growers do irrigate, but as you know, a rain is always preferred, just to help kind of size up the berries a bit too. So we were finding, especially with the heat, that our kind of second and third pickings with the June bearing strawberries just weren't there, and the size, and with the lower kind of plant density for some growers, definitely overall I'd say is below average for yield, which is unfortunate. I mean, the demand, again, kind of this similar to last year, unbelievable demand. I think even if we had a bumper crop of strawberries, there still wouldn't have been enough out there. Manitobans have definitely discovered strawberries that they grow here, and they want to pick them, and they want to definitely harvest them. So demand was huge, supply wasn't there, so some growers were having to kind of limit pickers to 2 baskets per group type of thing. People got berries, but maybe not the 10 baskets that you picked, maybe only the 2 or 4. So and just a note for growers to kind of keep on irrigating the strawberry crop as we're getting through August here, because as with a lot of fruit crops, they are forming the fruit buds for next year. So definitely important, critical to keep moisture levels at decent levels for the strawberries. Moving on to raspberries, which is just probably wrapping up for a lot of people. The photo you see in the middle there is showing a raspberry with sun scald damage. It doesn't change the taste of it or anything, just doesn't look good, and it can tend not to last as long in the field. You kind of have to pick them faster. But we were seeing occur, as John was talking about, spotted wing Drosophila. For growers who did apply controls for spotted wing, I would say it was an average yield for raspberries. Probably with the drought, probably the raspberries didn't size up as especially the later harvest, probably as much as we normally see in the Boyne or Nova types. If you didn't apply controls for spotted wing, definitely it was below average, but I mean, we've seen that every year, that kind of situation. I know just at home on my, raspberry crop, I usually get off, I get half the harvest off, and then the second half is just so full of larvae that it's not worth picking. They're just too soft. So that's about done. Good news on the Saskatoon front. Definitely, it was above average yield for most orchards. Even though we had that late frost in May, did see some flower mortality from that frost. However, didn't seem to affect yield because Saskatoons and a lot of tree fruit would normally abort flowers anyways. So really good yields on the Saskatoons. Actually good size too. And I don't know if it's because it's native to the prairies. It seems to be a little more tolerant to the drought conditions, but really, really good Saskatoon yields this year. So that was really nice and really good demand. Kind of once people are kind of figuring out there weren't a lot of strawberries around, they were trying to get any kind of berries. So it's definitely high demand for that. So that was really good for growers. Sour cherry harvest just wrapped up last week for a lot of growers. Not that we have a lot of growers, but yields were average. It was, again, with the drought conditions, probably didn't size up as much as we normally see, but I guess the number of cherries were there. They probably just weren't as large as we're used to. When I'm talking about the sour cherries, I'm talking about the varieties that were released from the University of Saskatchewan many years ago. And so I'd say it was definitely an acceptable year for the sour cherries. Crop, did you see at the bottom middle is Haskap, which is actually a lot of the varieties we have here. Some of the growers have. It's a newer crop. It's harvested typically, the varieties that are grown commercially, for the most part, you're looking at mid-June harvest to late June. So it's actually, and into July a little bit, is actually, I'd say, average to maybe even above average for the Haskap. So those did quite well. Kind of got ahead of the heat a bit. So that was another welcome crop. Moving on to apples, it was definitely how much, I guess, apple production we're going to see now is dependent on whether the apples were flowering in full bloom during that late May frost event. If the plants were in full bloom and you did see like a long kind of that -4, -5 for 5-6 hours, definitely saw a lot of flower mortality. And so definitely in those areas that unfortunately were in full flower, full bloom, definitely a reduced apple crop. But in those other areas where it wasn't hit as hard, kind of just that -2 or warmer, definitely I would say that harvest is probably be about average. What we're not seeing though is the apples, a lot of them are in green stage right now. They're not sizing up, and that's because of the drought. Normally, we don't water apple trees that often. We tend to baby, I think, apple trees a little bit too much in this province. But I think for this year, if you want to see that the apples kind of size up better, I think would be prudent to probably just give it some moisture. And when you do, this is kind of true for any tree fruit or tree in particular, when you do a watering of a tree, you want to do a deep water. So depending on the size of the tree, how established it is, you know, 20-minute watering type of thing, to really give it a good soaking. So you get down to those deep roots. It's for, I guess, one more crop I'll touch on, kind of another early crop, rhubarb. It was a tough year for rhubarb in that we were kind of cool and dry, and then got right into heat, which doesn't really help for rhubarb production, that high heat. So I definitely, I would say, for those who do grow rhubarb commercially, it was probably below average for yield, just because of we had the heat come on so much in June. I mean, we had really July temperatures in June. So it really kind of slows down the growth of the rhubarb. So yeah, just overall, again, if you have any questions, definitely shoot us some questions here. But just a good reminder to keep the watering on, for particularly on strawberries as they're forming the fruit buds, kind of through August into early September. Also, if you have a strawberry field that you established this year, definitely need watering to help get those runners established. And you kind of want runners established by, like, that means rooted down in the soil well and starting to grow larger kind of by mid-August, so that they have enough reserves to survive the winter. So yeah, so that's it from my portion of the harvest summary talk. Marla, if there's any questions or chat things, we can answer those now.
Hey, Anthony, I'm not seeing anything come up in the question or chat box yet, but everybody can add their questions if they have. I actually have a question for you. Myself, listening to you talk about some of the fruit trees probably and kind of bush type commodities, and maybe I'm thinking about my own backyard and the sour cherries that I've got there. But considering how dry it's been this year, and again, we really don't know what's coming for the rest of this season, what are the kind of implications or plans or things that might need to be in place if we're thinking ahead to next year? So some of these crops that may have been suffering a bit through this year's drought, is there a need to be thinking about, you know, providing water when available or when you can, to be thinking ahead to next year to prep that crop to kind of get through the winter?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Definitely, as I mentioned, there a lot of the fruit crops do form their fruit buds this year for next year. So if the tree is stressed this year, you're probably going to see reduced harvesting next year. So, and I know in some RMs it's going to be difficult because with water restrictions to be able to water, but definitely try to keep, not overwater, but, you know, make sure there's sufficient water for those tree fruit. Keep in mind, I mean, if it's established plant, they're going to have a pretty good root system. They're going to be accessing that deep water reserves. And I think the key, especially if we continue to be dry into fall, once the plants go dormant and it's still dry, it would be good to give the trees, the fruit trees, apple trees, a good watering, so that the roots are good, well hydrated going into winter. I mean, one of the reasons we do get winter injury is not so much the cold, but the dryness, the cold winds that dry out the plant. And if they're, you know, if it's going into winter, kind of in a drought or in a kind of moisture deficit situation, it definitely is more stressful on that plant and will potentially lead to more winter injury. And the first thing that would be injured on a fruit tree would be the fruit buds. That's the first thing to kind of die off or have injury. So yeah, I say for commercial growers and homeowners, definitely want to give good watering into the fall, especially if we continue on this dry cycle. Give it a watering for sure a couple times in August. Respecting your RM water restrictions. Keep in mind, I mean, it's unlikely that an established fruit tree would die because of the drought. As long as it got some moisture at some point, I don't think you need to be overwatering, especially, if water is in short supply or you're in a restricted zone. So I think that more critical state would be, let's say you get absolute worst, you had to get one good watering in August and then a good watering again late fall once they go dormant.
Thanks. John Hurd also posted that he can give a bit of an update on sweet corn. John?
That'd be good.
Okay. Marla, I was just going to say I've been spending a few hours picking sweet corn here, and I'm observing a few problems. One is we anticipated that pollination would be a problem this year with it being so hot and dry. And I find that the corn that I hand pollinated, meaning walk through and shake the pollen, is much better. The problem is that when it's hot and dry like that, often the tassels come out, they shed their pollen often before the silks have emerged, and so we don't have sex happening at the same time, and so the pollen is being shed while the silks are not there. They're not ready, so it can lead to some poor kernel development. So I'm seeing some of that customers may just have to get used to that this year. For me, that's the 13th cob that you get in a dozen is going to be that one. The other thing, I was interested listening to John Gavlosky because I have more European corn borer in my corn than I expected. I was too late or too cautious about my spray program, and I should have been right on top of it. I should have been more aggressive than I was. So I will be aggressive from now on. And the one other thing that's of note is that I've spoken earlier with Tom about my secret for keeping the coons out of my corn. And again, it's working good this year, and that's my headland of wheat. But one thing that my headland of wheat caused is that when I sprayed the weeds out of it, I used a mixture with 2,4-D. And obviously some of that 2,4-D got into my sweet corn, and the outside row or end of the rows has a very interesting but misshapen cobs with short cobs with the tassel growing out the end of the cob. And again, that's only because of a little bit of 2,4-D at the wrong time in sweet corn can cause malformed cobs. So anyways, that's a little update. My other update for folks is that if sweet corn is short in volume, make sure it's high in price. I'll sign out.
Thanks, John. So I think before we wrap up here, Marla, if there's any questions or something on the chat, do we need to address, or are we good?
Nothing needs to be addressed right now.
Good. Well, on that note, I'd just like to thank all of you who attended. I'd like to thank our presenters. And we value your feedback. And if you have any suggestions or comments, please send it to us. Hope you have a good day. And our next webinar in the 2021 Horticulture School Summer Webinar Series is Friday, August 20th at 9:30 a.m. So see you then, and have a good weekend. Thank you so much.